Okay. All right. What do you think? Taking my toys and then bye.
All right, so this hour, cut off. So if you have the AIM, stay up.
Computer's getting hot now.
All right, so this hour is chapters 4 and 5 in the AIM, and then some weather chart review that we'll look at. So we'll start with chapter 4. We'll kind of just skim through the sections and then point out the relevant parts, the juicy parts.
So that was Bob's Flying Eagle? No, what was it? For the CFI?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what that was.
Phil the Eagle?
Yeah, that's right.
Phil the Eagle?
Yeah, that's right.
So chapter 4 is, starts with services available to pilots. So this is going to give in detail, what ATC can do for us with traffic control centers, what they can provide for information, control towers, basically types of communication, frequencies, radar traffic information services. So the purpose and how they kind of prioritize, giving vectors and separating traffic. But basically their ATC's priority is to separate IFR to IFR traffic, and then IFR to VFR traffic, and then if there's nothing going on and workload permits, VFR to VFR. So that's how they prioritize what they need to do. And they are correcting our vector based on our ground track, right? That's the only thing they can see, right? They can't really see what heading we are. They can only see our trajectory, where we're going. So that's also a thing when they call out traffic. They're calling out traffic based on what our ground track is, or a course. So if our nose is this way, but we're drifting this way, our ground track is actually where my arm is. So if they call out traffic at 12 o'clock and we're going this way, it's going to be over here, not on the front of where our nose is, if you're in VFR conditions. But that's how they're going to vector traffic. This one's good even for VFR students. Radio communication, the phonetic alphabet, looking at that. Talking about speeds. How to say things, right? Very distinctly saying the numbers, like 1, 9, or 0, things like that. Altitudes as well. So this, when you get up to the 10,000, 11,000, it's 1, 2,000. You're going to say each numeric number, and then 1,000 instead of 12,000, something like that. It's more of, that's a slang term. Airport operations, mainly ground op stuff. But if you're coming in Lost Comm, then you're still not going to have a radio when you're coming into the airport. Hopefully they know you're coming, but you're still going to expect light gun signals, or could expect those. Things to consider with taxiing with low visibility ops. So, it could cause runway incursion, taxiway incursion, things like that. Holding short of the ILS critical line when conditions are low. So there's an advisory on that. The low visibility operations, and then advisory or an AC on the runway incursion. Can't remember the number right now. How to do practice instrument approaches right before initiating. Basically, to summarize this, it's you want to specify that your VFR practice approach each time. That'll help clarify to the ATC, especially if you're changing multiple frequencies, like especially in this area. Checking in on the approach or vectors or whatever on a VFR practice approach. Sometimes the next controller doesn't understand it and they think you are either on IFR or you want to pick up IFR clearance for the approach. So just reiterating those things. ATC clearances and separation. So clearance items. This is where we break this into acronym CRAFT. If you use ForeFlight, it has a scratch pad that's actually CRAFT there, so you can just you can fill in the blanks, or you can buy pieces of paper that have CRAFT on it. So C is going to be your clearance limit. So usually for us, like in smaller GA planes, it's going to be the airport. So we're cleared to Salinas Airport. You could be cleared to a fix or VOR though. So that doesn't mean that you can necessarily go to the airport only after your expect further clearance time elapses or your ETA elapses. But like 99% of the time we're cleared to an airport, so we don't necessarily need to worry about that. And then route of flight, right? So especially when we're thinking about this on a takeoff, it could be a departure procedure. And if they do specify a departure procedure, they may not necessarily tell you the altitude because it's going to be specified on the departure procedure plate itself. What altitude to go to, and then maybe it'll say top altitude assigned to ATC or assigned by ATC. So they won't say, expect 7,000 after 5 minutes. So it'll just say climb via the SID or climb via Livermore 1 departure or whatever it is. Also, the frequency may not be on there either. Or they may not verbally tell you the frequency because departure frequency will be on the departure plate. So clearance, route, altitude, frequency for the controller departure, and then T is for transponder code, squawk code that you're going to get. Okay, so this is what we kind of teach and introduce for picking up a IFR clearance from the ground, right? Either from the ground with a flight service station or on the ground, with a ground facility will give it to us, or clearance delivery if it's at a busy airport. That's what they're going to give us. Anytime you can, it's good to use references from the AIM and the FAR to teach, right? Because it's right there for you.
Yeah, let me just mention that this happened to me. If you're going to places like Tahoe and it's really busy and you're trying to pick up a clearance, make sure you read the NOTAMs, because these days they're asking you to do it by phone before you clog up the airport. And I had
get your clearance by phone?
By phone, yeah. And I had a jet in front of me pull out and hadn't got it by phone, and he's looking for his clearance, and I told him, give us a phone call. Now, I think he could do it by a cell phone, but here he is sitting on the runway without a clearance, people in back of him. So just beware.
Yeah,
Vacation times, high density airports, they're wanting you off the airways.
Yeah, at busy airports too, sometimes they'll specify on the ATIS, contact clearance delivery 15 minutes before startup or something.
This was
like
a
that.
half hour.
Yeah.
By phone, half hour. If you don't do it, sorry, we can't help you. So you're sitting there for a while.
Yeah. And, other thing that helps with that, the ATC workload, is if you can take off VFR and pick up IFR in flight.
Especially out here now with no Manteca, that if you can get going toward Modesto and not screw around with lots of turning, that helps.
Yeah.
Do you ever have a problem, though, getting a clearance when you're up in the air?
Not really. It's just radio congestion, and depending on where you're at and where you want to go. If you're, VFR and you want to pick up a clearance, but you're kind of already going through approach path or something, then they're not going to be too happy with that. If you're kind of out in the clear and you're already kind of en route and it's easy for them to pick up the segment that you're on, then it's...
Oh, but you're saying
like
if you depart VFR, you don't have to worry about how long it's going to take
Well,
to get the clearance.
They
depends on
can
where you're
clear
at.
you somewhere VFR and then give you a clearance later.
Yeah.
True.
Oh, okay.
They can say remain VFR, expect clearance in 10
Yeah, but
miles.
don't box yourself in. That's right. By weather, if you're saying, okay, it's 1,500 feet and I'll just take off from here and start to climb and get my clearance over Hayward or something, and all of a sudden they say, can't accommodate you.
Yeah. And you have to understand,
Not
exactly.
happy.
Like Palo Alto, you look in the chart.
What's it?
Yeah. So do you need?
Walk in the back.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So if you look at Palo Alto's departure, there is no departure procedure, but it always says that you have to file or go to San Jose first, which you actually never end up going there. But so if you took off and you did a left downwind and figured, okay, I'm gonna get past Moffett and pick up IFR to Salinas, they may not be happy with that because you're too close to San Jose arrivals.
They want you 060 downwind.
They want you out this way,
Yeah.
and like even to go to Concord, right? They put you way out past Mount Diablo, up and around like Antioch and back in. So if you're just like, well, I'm going to call them up at Hayward, like near Hayward, be IFR to Concord, they're going to give you vector turn 090, you know, climb maintain 5,000, and then you're going to fly out there like 20 minutes, be like, I'm over Tracy, like I want to go to Concord now. So yeah, important thing. It is kind of that's a good segue to VFR on top. So VFR on top is a clearance that you have to request. But it's not something that they're just going to give you to make it easier for them. You have to request it, and what it allows you to do is act under VFR conditions, either above a ceiling or even if there's no or if there's nothing below you, you can still act on VFR clearance. So the tricky part with this is you have to abide by all IFR rules and VFR. So IFR meaning that you have to report unforecasted weather. You have to abide by the IFR minimum altitudes, but you can be at a VFR altitude above that. Right? You can't just go below like an Oroka and be at a VFR altitude. You have to go above MEA or above Naroka and then plus 500, for the altitude that you're at.
And what's the rules about leaving? Once you've left the altitude, then
So any altitude changes have to be requested and authorized, basically, because you're cleared, unless you get a block altitude of VFR altitudes. If you say I want to climb maintain 9,500, they say cleared, to maintain 5,000 or 9,500. But if there's something in your way, like a cloud, right? So now you're VFR on top, so you have to avoid maybe clouds or other traffic, things like that. Changing altitudes, you have to request that and get a clearance for it.
there's something about, in my mind, about you can go up, but once you've departed from that and descended, then you can't go back up again.
Correct. Yeah, it's only like a good one-time authorization. So if you want a new altitude, that's your assigned. You can't like go back to where you were. You can't play around with that. Now the reason why you'd want to use VFR on top, maybe there's a thunderstorm and you say, well, if I just get VFR on top, I can navigate around it and they don't have to keep giving you vectors, things like that. It could be for icing conditions. If you're in icing, but you know that there's VFR somewhere else, then you ask to divert, and then you get VFR, and you want to continue at that. So the only thing that I guess I would advise on this is, which I read recently, I think on AOPA or something, there's a video on getting stuck above the icing, which sometimes we don't think about a lot. We kind of think about, oh, we don't want to climb too high into icing, but what if you get out of here, it's nice and warm, but then there's a layer up high, and you're above it, but you need to descend through it, and now it's cold. Well, you're going to descend through the icing. So things to think about, even when after we take off. Okay, so yeah, we have to maintain VFR conditions as well, right, for cloud clearances on that, and for traffic. Separation standards, so it talks about it. 3 miles between aircraft within 40 miles of radar antenna, 5 miles beyond 40, so more separation. But basically 3 and 5 miles is your separation. Speed adjustments, this one's good, so let's see. So this is kind of for high level stuff. Faster aircraft. But there's also, later on, I think it's in chapter 5, where it specifies they have to give you, or they have to allow 3 minutes before your speed adjustment, before they expect it to happen, and then like 5 minutes before a holding clearance. They can't just, you can't be like a minute away from a fix and then they just give you a holding clearance. If you get close to that, you should request it. So it's kind of, usually they're good about it, like you have never reached a fix and then not had a holding clearance anyways. They usually give it pretty prior, but things like that. TCAS, so I think, yeah, this is where it specifies if you have TCAS and you see something or get alerted, you can divert, but then you have to tell ATC like immediately what's going on and why. And they can, hopefully their system is working good. Get back on there. Yeah, surveillance system. So, pretty soon we're going to have ADSB and everything in controlled airspace. So it pretty much takes care of everybody. If you're flying in Idaho or Montana, there could be people buzzing around without ADSB and Echo, because they don't. But think about Echo as controlled airspace. So basically, they're going to be limited to class golf. But hopefully, everybody does their due diligence on ADSB. Alaska offshore, I'll leave to you guys if you're going to fly over there, and Gulf of Mexico as well.
No drug runs to Mexico.
Yeah. So Chapter 5, again, it's kind of like an IFR flight plan. So it starts with pre-flight, goes to departure procedures, en route procedures, arrival, and then this section, roles and responsibilities, and national security. So at the top, pre-flight, so this is where we can look at our codes, right, for filing purposes, with different equipment suffixes. These are.
Is that the international or is that?
No, this one's the domestic. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. This one's the domestic, and I think. Let's see.
Are we supposed to do ICAO now when we file?
No, so they keep pushing back the deadline for ICAO. So.
Yeah, I fly all ICAO, and the number of letters you've got to have associated with the airplane are mind-boggling.
Yeah. I mean, ForeFlight makes it easier because it tells you, right? But to memorize all the codes, it's because Slant Golf is not GPS for ICAO. It's like N or something. I can't remember what it is. So it's kind of a thing that we'll put off until we have to do it, kind of, and then we'll make the switch.
So what are the expectations for a double I applicant on a check ride when it comes to knowing all of these acronyms and such? Is it the ability to look them up, or is it to have them all in your head?
You can look them up, but as long as you don't look up everything. So as long as maybe they don't pick your weak subject, right? If they happen to pick like a weak area that you're on and you have to look up 10 things, then that's probably not good. Check ride strategy, there is some short-term memory things that you just have to kind of put in there short-term and know that the check ride's happening, and then once it's done, you kind of drop it. But you can look it up. If you can look it up and then teach from the resource, that's even better. One thing that you can say is, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but if I were teaching a student, I would look it up to give them the correct answer. I wouldn't want to try to do something off the top of my head or BS it. And then if you can take 2-3 minutes to find the good resource or the reference, and then be like, here it is. This is your direct answer, and then this is what I would teach about it. Then that's the thorough way to do it. So, side note, VFR flight plans you have to close yourself, right? IFR is automatically canceled or closed.
What's DVFR?
That one's defense. That's a military defense.
You have to
VFR
have those
flight
if
plan.
you're operating in that
Military
area,
or something.
right? Correct.
I don't know.
I think
I
you
don't
do.
know about that.
I think you have
Like
to file
MOAs?
that flight plan.
Like MOAs or.
Like if you're in Washington D.C., I think you have to file a DVFR flight plan.
Oh, okay.
Which a flight plan is kind of, for VFR, is kind of one of those, it's like
Yeah.
going hiking and saying, I'm going here.
Yeah.
Just let you know this time we'll be back.
Yeah. Yeah, so IFR, it'll be canceled or closed with a ATC facility if there's one at the airport, right, a towered airport. If it's uncontrolled, you need to call them either over the phone, on the radio, briefer, last case scenario, drive into town, get a landline, things like that. If you're out in the middle of nowhere. You can cancel on the air too, but it's got to be a back and forth, right? Cancel IFR, cancellation received, and then you restate that it's canceled in your VFR.
And the problem with that is if you don't cancel early, they're gonna hold that airspace open. So if there's other people behind you, it gets really.
Yeah, so it's more of a courtesy thing, you know, especially coming into here. Class Delta airports usually are one IFR in, one IFR out. This happens at St. Carlos all the time with Surf Air coming in.
Oh,
And
I hate
here.
when they see that here.
So they hold you, right, for departures or other arrivals, they'll hold you out farther. So, and uncontrolled airports. So it's more of a courtesy thing, you know, be a good neighbor if you can, if you're VFR and get down, then do it. Departure procedures, so there's some ground ops here. And void times. So clearance void times, hold for release, right? So hold for release is going to be traffic flow things. And then clearance void times are for uncontrolled airports. You actually receive the clearance on the ground, right? And so they hold the airspace like we were kind of talking about. You've received your clearance, like we specified in the FARs, 91-173, that you have to receive a clearance in a flight plan. And they have a void time where if you usually go 30 minutes past that, then your clearance is void. So be ready, to go take off, basically. Be efficient in the run-up and make sure that you can take off because they're holding that airspace. And if you don't get off in time, then you need to call them immediately and tell them that we're not off so they don't keep holding it. This section is really, really good. It's thick, but it's good. It's got important things in here. So 5-2-8, instrument departure procedures, ODPs, and SIDs. So it talks about what they are, why it's necessary. It's recommended that we always use these if they're available or nighttime IFR departures. It helps with flow, traffic flow, and it's also terrain separation, safety. They do it based on feet per nautical mile, right? Because like in this point, they don't necessarily know how fast you're going from the runway towards the terrain. So they have to do it, not based on time. They have to do dimensionally the required climb gradient. So what we have to do is we have to convert that for us, right? So there's a few ways to do it, but the easiest way is we're going to take our ground speed, divide it by 60. This gets it into minutes for us. That's what the 60 is for. And then we're going to multiply our required feet per nautical mile. And that will give us the feet per minute that we need to meet or exceed to assure that we're going to have the climb performance for whatever departure procedure it is. The standard is 200 feet per nautical mile. So at our speeds, that's pretty easy to do. Let's just say, easy math, if we're at 60 ground speed, that's just one, so it's 200 feet per minute. So if we're at 90 or so, it's 300 feet per minute. Pretty easy. If you see an obstacle departure procedure for an airport, that probably means that there's going to be a feet per nautical mile greater than 200. Like at Deer Valley and Phoenix, Aspen, high terrain places, it's going to be like.
If you see what
Obstacle departure procedure, an ODP listed for the airport.
Yeah.
Your feet per nautical mile is going to be 400, 500, 600, which for us, it's going to be hard to do, right? As it increases, because if we're ground speed even at 70 or 80, we're going to have to get 800 feet per minute climb, something like that.
Oh, yeah, and if you're at altitude with
At
about
altitude.
72,
Yeah, so
only,
that's
only in the winter time.
right. But then you probably don't want to be flying IFR in the winter in
Right.
172 actual IMC.
Right.
Yeah. So then that's where it comes into the case where to meet that climb gradient, we have to leave fuel.
Mhm.
And then we can't go as far and all this, it spirals on itself. In here, it also talks about visual climb overhead the airport. So if we can't meet a climb gradient, and there's specified conditions that we can climb to, usually they're pretty much like VFR. So an example would be if the conditions are 1,500 ceiling and 3 mile visibility, we can do climb in visual conditions over the airport because the ceiling is pretty high, right, 1,500, and we just climb up. We basically do a circle climb over the runway because we know there's no obstructions, vertical from that. And then we can climb up to the specified altitude for the departure procedure and then continue on route or as specified.
And you'd let the controller know that that's what you're doing.
And where
Yeah.
is that? Is that?
That's number 7 here. So this, it kind of there. So yeah, it says right there, pilot's responsible to advise ATC early as possible. So you would probably, you could try to put that in the remarks when you file and see what happens. Or when you call it clearance delivery or ground, you'd say, ready for IFR clearance, needing the visual climb overhead the airport. And they'll still give you the departure procedure, but they'll say, probably on ground frequency or clearance delivery that you're cleared for that visual overhead. And it kind of makes sense because they're either going to hold VFR traffic or there's not going to be any other IFR traffic doing it. So it's safe. Diverse vector areas, right? That's like Palo Alto. So, out of here, every single time we get turn right heading 060 within 1 nautical mile of the airport, radar vectors, San Jose, then on course or whatever. Victor 334, wherever you're going. And then the altitude, right? So expect 5 minutes, or expect 5,000 5 minutes after departure, things like that. It talks about responsibilities in here on the departure. So it's the same thing, if you're out of an uncontrolled airport, you are responsible for your terrain separation once you encounter IFR, right? Because you're on IFR clearance, so you're permitted to operate in IMC, but maybe you're not in radar contact yet with the controller. So, if there is a departure procedure, use that for sure. If there's not, then you're going to have to figure out, if they're going to give you a vector off the ground, but it's your responsibility to maintain separation from the ground on terrain. So if you're climbing out and not getting the performance you thought or something like that, then you're going to have to modify. Just because you're IFR doesn't mean you can't use a sectional and look where the terrain is, and understand where you're at. Before flight makes it way easier. So in section 3, en route procedures, that's where the holding is going to be. And some other stuff. Position reporting is important. And what to include. So this is non-radar, right? The list at the bottom is the things that you need to include if you are checking in. The important thing is you're saying where you're at and then your ETA to the next fix, not necessarily the whole way. So look at holding is right there. The types of entries, the airspeeds and altitudes, 5-3-8, phrasal, phrases, and then the entries, parallel, teardrop, direct. This isn't really good to teach from, I would say, but it's just a good review once the student knows what all these things mean. Arrival procedures, so approach clearance, what it means, especially if you have an approach clearance and then you change to advisory frequency, something like that. The different types of approaches as ILS, independent approaches. There's a keep out zone. This is why SFO has delays all the time when it's low, is because they don't have the separation. So they can only do single ILS and one at a time. It talks about visual approach and contact approach. I'll just leave those you guys to look at because we're kind of behind. Missed approach, see and avoid responsibilities, VFR on top as well,
You know,
and the national security stuff.
on 538 about the hold and
Yeah.
entries,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I know they get some get sticky about 70 degrees, are you 1 degree off of that, you know, off of the fix or whatever. So, but what I read is on 536D, it mentions the word entry and holding recommended by the FAA. So I'm wondering how tough the examiners get on all
So there's,
decision of entry. And this
Yeah.
whole issue about the protected side and the non-protected side, you know,
Yes.
that's a lot of misinformation, I think, about that as well.
yeah, well, for the test, you're definitely going to be on the protected side, and they're testing the entry within 3/4 scale deflection on the inbound course. That's the standards for it, plus or minus 100 feet on altitude, and the heading is going to depend on wind correction. So basically, that's your standard. Yeah, don't tell this until the student is good at holds, but ATC just wants you to be on the protected side. You could go across, do circles, and then come back to the fix and do that, but they just want you on the protected side.
Well, but that's where the country, because on a parallel entry, what's non-protected? I mean, there's a whole article on that.
Yeah, so the protected.
In the old days, you
Yeah.
do the parallel pretty far away, so you could make one turn back in and you'd be on course.
Yeah.
Now they want you close. You know, the
Tighter.
diagrams are closed, so you go inside, and then you come. So you have to make a 270 degree. That's
Yeah, so I think a rule of thumb is basically 4 nautical miles around the fix is protected, but then there's a boundary area outside of that. And you'd have to look at, I think it's the terps to see, it depends on if you're holding at an approach fix or a VOR or like an in-route segment, or if it's a designated holding spot or a published holding spot, what the dimensions are for the protected side. So that's, yeah. But basically, right, we'll just, with students, we'll practice it, correctly.
I understand.
And at these speeds, it's pretty easy to stay. But if you're faster, right, you could cross on a teardrop or something and get pretty far
Yeah,
out, especially with a tailwind or something.
Mm-hmm.
So even on the entry, I mean, once you're really proficient at holds, even on the entry, you want to do some kind of wind correction, like on a teardrop, parallel, or direct. When we teach it, we just say do it and fix it later. But when you're proficient at it, you definitely want to get that started as early as you can. So now we're going to go to weather charts, a review of weather charts. And I'm going to try to bring this up. So this will be in the Dropbox as well, but it's a really good resource kind of for the rote memorization items for IFR, or if you're doing IBC or double I. This is a really good summary sheet. Pilots Cafe, we use a couple of apps from them as well. They have a holding procedures app that we use, and they have an intercepting and tracking VOR app as well. That's pretty good. So, but this has a really good review sheet here. So it goes through, pilot requirements, currency requirements, flight plan stuff, fuel alternate things, and it has references as well, which is nice. Back to the FAR or the AIM. Like here, the craft, it has a reference for the AIM. Speeds, all this kind of stuff. So we'll skip down to the weather charts. It's a little outdated on this thing because it's 2011 from this, but it has the general things. Let's see. So we'll go here to weather charts. So a learning mechanism or a memory mechanism for like SIGMETs, AIRMETs is the more severe the condition, the shorter validity time. Right, so AIRMET starts at the biggest one, so 6 hours validity. And airmets are just advisories, right? It depends on your equipment and aircraft ability, whether it's going to impact your flight or not. So it's relative to the aircraft you're flying. SIGMETs are dangerous for all aircraft, depending on, or it is dangerous for all aircraft. And the validity time goes down to 4 hours. Convective SIGMET is basically you don't want to fly, and you probably don't want to be outside because it's thunderstorms, something crazy, hail, something's going on. So it goes down to 2 hours. Right? So in this review sheet, it talks about the qualifying conditions that have to exist for one of these to be produced. But the big reference for it is actually, it's not a handbook, it's an AC. It's the Weather Advisory, Weather Advisory Services handbook, or the AC is 00-45H is the newest one. So it talks about the qualifying conditions of when these are published, how long they're good for, gives a decoder for airmet, METARs and TAFs, things like that. So, convective SIGMET is going to be activated when thunderstorms, severe thunderstorms, that is, surface winds greater than 50, hail at the surface 3/4, tornadoes, embedded thunderstorms, like squall lines, things like that. Just a regular, good old-fashioned SIGMET is going to be, severe icing, turbulence, clear air turbulence, dust storms, volcanic ash. Like I think Mexico had a volcanic ash one for a while, last few weeks.
Didn't they just remove sandstorm? Sand is a identifier on.
I'm not sure.
Maybe not SIGMETs, METARs. I was reading something of changes they've made.
Let's look at that. Airmet, so there's 3 types, right? The identifiers Tango, Zulu, Sierra. So Tango, T for turbulence, that one's kind of easy. Z for icing, and then Sierra for mountain obstruction or extended IFR conditions. PIREPs, METARs. So PIREPs, there's urgent and just normal. So PIREPs can be used, for known icing conditions, things like that. METAR. The ironic thing with PIREPs is, like on a day to like today, you probably want a good PIREP, but they usually don't happen. You're kind of hoping for one to kind of see where it's like, where you're going, and nobody's flying. There's not a lot of people flying, so you don't get those PIREPs. So METAR, right? So every hour they're produced. A specie can come out if there's a significant update. The TAF is located 5 statute miles from the station. And the TAFs are produced by meteorologists in the centers. So it's not like somebody at the airport. They're basing it off historical conditions and then observations in the area. So the TAF is 4 times per day, every 6 hours, or 30 hours if it's typically the Bravo airports have 30-hour TAFs, like the bigger airports have them. So this is where the validity of this kind of fades, because we don't have the area forecast anymore. We have the graphical chart that we'll look at. Weather depiction chart is also combined into the GFA tool. We still have the surface analysis chart, like the prog charts, right? 12 hour, 24, we can extend from there. Radar summary chart is not available anymore. It's combined onto the GFA tool. Winds and temperatures aloft, definitely still there. The GFA tool makes it really nice because you can plot basically by color, what the strength of the wind is going to be. So it makes it easier to look at visually than pulling out, a spot like SFO and then looking at all the altitudes and converting, the decoder if you have a 7 at the beginning versus, a normal number, right? Because then you have to take off 5 for the direction because the wind speed's more than 100, things like that. All this conversion stuff that we needed way back when because we didn't have the capacity to display it or to transmit it very well. So we had to code everything. So I think decoding is going to be a skill that fades because there's no really sense of teaching it.
Well, pretty much now, and a lot of it you can get it in English.
Yeah, plain English. Yeah. Yep. So winds aloft, and then these are the significance charts as well: low, mid, level, and high. Convected outlook if there's one. That'll pop up in like the segment area. There's a convective outlook. So for now, we'll spend a few more minutes and we'll just look at aviationweather.gov to kind of see these charts in action. They should be, like for the written tests, they should be updating, like for the radar summary chart that doesn't exist, they should be updating the question bank to not ask those, but you could get some question on it. So, right, for IFR we need like known and forecasted weather conditions, and we should track it somehow. So either DUATS, you can link DUATS to this account, or like ForeFlight, so that if there's any discrepancy at the end of the day, you can say this is when and where I got my weather, and it was valid. If you say, well, I looked at aviationweather.gov, it's not linked to your tail number necessarily. So you want to get a briefing. If you're not going to take the time to do it over the phone, you want to link your DUATS account to ForeFlight or something to get a briefing. 1-800-WX-BRIEF has a website now too, which you can get a briefing from there. So you can make an account from that. Let's come back up. All right, so we can basically look at forecasts and observations, advisories.
What link is this? Which one?
Aviationweather.gov, yeah, and navigate from there. So no real segments, just some stuff way over here. Aeromets. So again, these are going to be dependent on where you're going and the capability of the aircraft. So basically in GA planes, we always want to pay attention to icing and turbulence. Can't really get around with that. And then low, mountain obstruction or IFR conditions. We'll just kind of click on each one of these. So prog charts, right? This is the surface plot. These are pretty good to understand what's going to happen in the future.
Is this current, by the way?
Yeah.
Did you just bring it up?
Yeah, I just popped this up. So this one's the
So
surface.
it's moving.
Yeah, so you can look at, if it's going to be high or low, if there's going to be a front coming through, if something's going to be stationary, warm front, cold front. Within, I think, 24 hours or 48, it'll give you the chance of weather types by color coding. But beyond, I think, 48, it just drops off. I guess it does give it.
I don't know if you know the answer to this. The brown lines are ridges, and a lot of times they you can see one.
These orange ones? Or?
Yeah, or the dash thing. And these ridges frequently sit right just inland from the coast, and we get some funky weather associated with that. And it's one thing you need to find out. Understand.
Are you looking at these orange lines?
No, yeah. If you look, say, on the left near Cabo and everything else, there's frequently those things, troughs or ridges sit right over where we are when there's unusual weather associated. And I get the highs and the lows and the.
So a trough is an extreme low. So it's almost like you can think of it a low pressure coming into like a valley.
Okay.
So what happens is everything kind of gets dumped into that low pressure area, That's where we get
Some strong and funky winds.
yeah, weird winds and low visibility, things like really low rain
That's why,
today. It's actually
that's why the windsurfers are all down in Cabo right now.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. It was actually like a friend of a friend was down there a couple weeks ago. Yeah, weird winds, and that's also an indication of wind shear. So if you look at, because people ask, okay, how do you find wind shear? It's like, well, rapid change in airspeed, but that means you're in the air. So how do you predict it on the ground? Well, you can look at where a front line is coming through, or like a trough, because any front movement is going to be associated with a wind change in direction of velocity, and that's what wind shear is.
Also, when you get the crazy, the isobars are so close together, like
Right.
up in New England there.
Yeah, the pressure gradients, especially climbing through altitudes. So this one's just surface, but one thing I want to point out here is that's pretty good is called the aviation forecast discussion, and it's basically plain English for, and it comes from the meteorologists in the centers on what's going to happen in the area. So it's still kind of divided up like a area forecast. But if I just clicked on San Francisco, and then it gives it in a paragraph form. The nice thing about this too is they're going to say their confidence in the TAF. So if they say like low confidence in the TAF, then that means that they're taking a guess at it, but it might change. But if they say high confidence that it won't change, then maybe that helps you make a decision on what you're going to do. So
Plus, it's in English.
yeah.
And what's that
And
showing
it's just
with all the
somebody talking.
what's that showing with all the colors on the states?
That's just showing the different sections, how it's divided up.
Pretty
So-
sure this is on 4-flight, right? Don't they implement this on 4-flight?
I'm not sure.
I don't know if I've seen it.
They don't have 4 flights.
Yeah, so it said, I mean, you'll find kind of funny things in here too, like slang or
There is a
just
discussion.
Yeah, there's a discussion.
informal,
At
terminology.
least it's not giving you latitude and longitude of.
Yeah.
That's good.
Right.
Yeah,
Always helpful. Yeah.
yeah. Yep, and it'll tell you, what's going to happen. So this one includes the Monterey Bay area, and then the bridge approach, and SFO stuff. That's kind of the primary.
But if you want, does that discussion change depending on where you put your arrow, or?
Oh, yeah,
If you want
definitely,
to see what's going on
Which one of
in
the colors?
Montana or something, or?
Yeah, like let's say, I'm just going to click on
Go
Atlanta.
to South
and
Carolina,
see
Georgia,
where
or
it is.
whatever. Yeah, go to, see what's going on in Atlanta.
So Atlanta, so VFR conditions will persist. Conditions that are prevailing. Right? It's basically they produce the TAF and then they say, well, this is why we made the TAF this way.
Now, are the colors significant, or are they just?
No, it just
Okay.
divides it up visually. Yeah, the colors won't change. It's not like it's green if it's good or red if it's bad. It's just scattered around.
It's just
And then, see right here, so the high confidence on all elements. So it kind of gives you, an indication of, I think this is going to happen, or, it's going to stay the same. It'll be pretty good. All right, so I want to give you guys a good break for lunch. So we'll break there, then we'll come back and we'll spend more time with the weather trucks and things like that.
2?
Yeah, 2 o'clock, so full hour. Yes, I'm good.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Be careful on the rain out there if you're going somewhere.